It was a sweltering summer afternoon, and the oppressive heat hung heavily in the air over a small southern town where life moved at its own unhurried pace. In this close-knit community, residents recognized one another by face, if not always by name, and the local grocery store on the corner served not only as a place to buy food, but also as a vital gathering spot. Here, neighbors congregated to exchange gossip and discuss the latest news about the town, its economy, and even the weather. In such an environment, every day unfolded with a slow, rhythmic familiarity that provided comfort and continuity. For General James Harrison, however, this particular day was different. Having recently returned home after a long and illustrious career in the United States Army, a career spanning 35 years that for him felt like a lifetime, Harrison had come back not only as a veteran, but as a man who had seen much and sacrificed even more. Rising from the modest rank of second lieutenant to become a high-ranking officer, he had earned the admiration of his peers and the respect of those who knew his story. His career was defined by unwavering dedication, remarkable strength, and an abiding sense of honor. Every aspect of his demeanor, his upright posture, the calm certainty in his gaze, and the quiet dignity with which he carried himself, spoke of a man who had mastered the art of discipline and who was not easily intimidated or shaken by life's challenges. On this day, like many others, General Harrison had decided to stop by the local grocery store to pick up a few essential items and perhaps engage in light conversation with his neighbors. Unlike the uniformed soldiers of his past, Harrison now dressed in simple yet well-kept civilian clothes. He wore a black polo shirt and a pair of jeans, choices that belied the commanding presence of a seasoned military leader. His broad shoulders and athletic build were still evident, but he had consciously opted for a look that allowed him to blend in with the community he now called home. After years of the regimented life that came with military service, he sought serenity and a taste of ordinary life in this quiet town. Harrison parked his sleek black Chevrolet Tahoe in the grocery store lot, turned off the engine and stepped out. As he did, he took a deep, deliberate breath of the hot, heavy air. A breath that seemed to carry with it the memories of distant battlefields and the sacrifices of countless comrades. In that moment, the simple act of breathing felt both like an assertion of life and a quiet tribute to his long, storied past. Unbeknownst to General Harrison, Officer Thomas Brown was patrolling the area that afternoon. Brown, who had transferred to this town only 6 months earlier, was a young, ambitious officer whose reputation had already been tarnished by whispers of rigidity and a pronounced bias toward the town's black residents. Throughout his short tenure, Brown had developed an air of insecurity that revealed itself in the way he interacted with members of the community. His demeanor was often overly strict, and he had quickly earned a reputation for his questionable attitude and harsh treatment of those he deemed different. When Brown caught sight of General Harrison, whose confident walk and composed demeanor immediately drew his attention, he felt an instant and inexplicable bias. In Brown's eyes, a black man driving a nice car and dressed too casually did not belong in this quiet town, a thought that took root without any rational basis. Determined to assert his authority, Brown approached Harrison with a curt, almost accusatory tone. "Hey, you!" he barked, his voice harsh and laden with contempt, as if addressing a suspected criminal rather than a respected veteran. Harrison paused for a moment, clearly puzzled by the sudden outburst. "Yeah, you. What are you doing here?" the general asked calmly, his voice measured and polite despite the unexpected confrontation. At first, Harrison assumed there must be some misunderstanding, a simple mix-up that could be resolved with a few words. However, as the officer drew nearer, it became evident that Brown's aggressive posture and tone left little room for explanation. "Is there a problem, officer?" Harrison inquired evenly, his face composed and his eyes steady. Although he was mentally preparing himself for an inevitable conflict, he maintained his characteristic poise and respect. "Yeah, there's a problem," Brown snapped, stepping closer and narrowing his eyes. "I don't like the way you're hanging around here. This area isn't for people like you. Now let me see your ID." Brown's voice was not a mere request, but a command, dripping with the certainty that the man before him did not belong. "I'm here to pick up groceries just like everyone else," Harrison replied in an even tone, his voice reflecting the calm of a man accustomed to respectful conversation. Yet, even as he spoke, Harrison felt a familiar tension rising within him, a tension honed over years of military discipline, a tension that allowed him to remain calm even in the face of injustice. Despite his measured words, Brown's suspicion remained unassuaged. In an attempt to assert his authority further, Brown's voice grew more menacing as he demanded, "I said, show me your ID now or I'll arrest you for non-compliance." His words carried an unmistakable threat, and the air between them grew thick with unease. Recognizing the potential for escalation, Harrison chose to remain as composed as he could. "My ID is in the car," he offered in a soft, conciliatory tone, hoping that a simple explanation might diffuse the tension. But Brown, whose aggressive stance was already firmly set, was not interested in any peaceful resolution. "Didn't you hear me?" Brown shouted, his voice echoing across the lot. "I said, show me your ID immediately." With that, and without any further warning, Brown lunged forward and grabbed Harrison's arm, twisting it harshly behind his back. In that instant, Brown's face flushed with a disturbing mix of anger and satisfaction as he exerted his power over the man before him. As the altercation unfolded, onlookers in the grocery store parking lot began to gather. People stopped what they were doing and turned their heads toward the commotion. Many were shocked to see a white officer physically detaining a black man who, to their eyes, exuded dignity and respect. Several bystanders quickly pulled out their phones, intent on recording every moment of what was clearly becoming a significant incident. Seconds later, a biker suit acted among the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. Someone remarked, "That's General Harrison," while another voice asked in disbelief, "What the hell is going on? Why is he being arrested?" Even as the crowd's anger and confusion grew, Brown remained resolute, his pride and growing ego preventing him from admitting even a hint of error. "You're under arrest for disobeying an officer," Brown declared in a harsh, final tone as he snapped the handcuffs tightly around Harrison's wrists. At this pronouncement, the crowd erupted in anger and disbelief. People began to shout, realizing that this was no ordinary routine stop. It was an overt manifestation of racial bias playing out in front of their very eyes. "Let him go!" an elderly woman cried out passionately. "That's our general. He served our country with honor." Yet Brown, intoxicated by the power he believed he wielded in that moment, paid no heed to the protests. In his mind, he was in complete control, and his actions were justified. Within minutes, the scene had taken on a larger significance. The growing crowd, now swelling with concerned onlookers, bore silent witness to an incident that quickly became a symbol of the racial tension that had long simmered beneath the surface in this small town. The tension in the air thickened with every passing second, and voices began to rise in protest, some demanding that the officer explain himself, others urging him to stop. But Brown, emboldened by his sense of authority, ignored every outcry. Just then, the sound of an approaching patrol car broke through the murmurs of the crowd. Sergeant Martin, a seasoned officer who had served in the town for many years, stepped out of the vehicle. His eyes immediately took in the scene. A crowd had gathered around his colleague, who was still in the midst of handcuffing General Harrison. Recognizing the general, a respected veteran and a cherished figure in the community, Martin felt a surge of anger. "What are you doing?" he called out as he pushed his way through the gathering crowd toward Brown and Harrison. "This is General Harrison. Release him immediately." For a long moment, Brown froze, his face flushed with a mix of anger and shame as he realized, perhaps too late, the gravity of what he had done. "General," he mumbled, his voice faltering. I didn't know who you were," he stammered, fumbling awkwardly with the handcuffs as the crowd's murmurs of disapproval grew louder with each passing second. Despite the humiliation and the physical discomfort of the situation, General Harrison remained remarkably composed. He understood, in that moment, the deep-seated issues at play. This was not merely an encounter with an overzealous officer, but a stark confrontation with systemic bias and the ignorance that often fueled it. "We all make mistakes, Officer Brown," Harrison said quietly, his voice imbued with the calm authority of a man who had faced far greater challenges in life. "But your job is to protect, not to humiliate. Your duty is to serve justice, not to let personal bias dictate your actions." Harrison's words resonated powerfully with the crowd. An eruption of applause and shouts of support rose from the onlookers. In that moment, many in the town affirmed what they already believed deep in their hearts. General Harrison was not just another man. He was a hero, a living symbol of honor and sacrifice. Sergeant Martin, seeing the tide of public sentiment clearly turning against Officer Brown, announced decisively that Brown would be suspended, pending a full investigation. The weight of the situation settled over everyone present, and the air grew heavy with the realization that Officer Brown's career, and indeed his reputation, might now be in jeopardy. In the days that followed, the incident at the grocery store quickly made headlines. Video footage of the altercation spread like wildfire across social media platforms, sparking conversations on a national scale about the enduring presence of racial bias in law enforcement and the everyday impact of such prejudice. For many, the story of General Harrison and his dignified composure under duress became a powerful symbol in the fight against discrimination. As discussions raged online and in community forums, it became clear that this was not an isolated incident, but a reflection of a broader, systemic problem that needed to be addressed urgently. Amid the growing outcry, the town's leaders and local activists organized community meetings to address the incident and to foster dialogue about the underlying issues of bias and injustice. These gatherings were held in the very space that had once been the center of everyday life, the local grocery store and the town hall. At these meetings, residents spoke candidly about their own experiences with discrimination and the ways in which bias had seeped into everyday interactions. The discussions were often heated, yet they were marked by a shared determination to bring about change and to ensure that the painful events of that afternoon would serve as a catalyst for a more just and inclusive future. Sergeant Martin, deeply troubled by what he had witnessed and the subsequent fallout, took it upon himself to advocate for comprehensive reform within the local police department. He argued passionately for increased training on cultural sensitivity, de-escalation techniques, and the importance of understanding the historical context of the community they served. Under his leadership, the department initiated new programs designed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. These programs included regular community liaison meetings, workshops on implicit bias, and forums where officers and residents could engage in honest dialogue about their shared experiences and aspirations for a better future. Meanwhile, General Harrison, who had endured the ordeal with quiet dignity, emerged as a vocal advocate for social justice. Invited to speak at community events, local schools, and regional conferences, he used his personal experience as a platform to call for systemic change. Our society must ensure that every individual is treated with dignity and respect, he proclaimed during one such event. No one should be subjected to humiliation simply because of who they are. We must confront the biases that exist within our institutions and work together to create a more equitable society. His measured tone, honed by decades of military leadership, struck a deep chord with many who were tired of injustice and discrimination. Local media outlets played a crucial role in amplifying the voices of those calling for reform. Newspaper editorials, television interviews, and radio segments frequently discussed the incident at the grocery store, examining it as a stark example of how racial bias could infiltrate even the most ordinary moments of life. Journalists interviewed residents who recounted their own encounters with prejudice, and the ensuing public discourse spurred further demands for accountability and change. Social media campaigns sprang up in support of General Harrison and against racial profiling in law enforcement, and hashtags advocating for justice and reform trended not only regionally but also nationally. In the midst of this unfolding public debate, Officer Thomas Brown's fate was sealed. An internal investigation, prompted by both community outrage and mounting evidence captured on video, ultimately led to Brown's dismissal from the police force. In a rare public statement, Brown apologized to General Harrison and the community, acknowledging that his actions had been driven by personal bias and an unacceptable abuse of authority. However, for many in the town, his apology did little to erase the memory of that painful afternoon, a day that had exposed the ugly truth about systemic injustice and the urgent need for reform. The incident, while deeply painful, also marked the beginning of a broader reckoning in the town. Community leaders, inspired by the courage and resilience of General Harrison, began to implement measures aimed at addressing the deep-rooted issues of racial bias. The local grocery store, once simply a place to buy food and exchange gossip, evolved into a center for community dialogue and activism. Regular town meetings were established, providing a forum for residents to voice their concerns, share their experiences, and collaborate on initiatives to promote fairness and inclusivity. These efforts, though met with some initial resistance, gradually paved the way for meaningful change. Sergeant Martin continued to be a steadfast advocate for reform within the police department. His tireless work led to the introduction of new training modules on implicit bias and community engagement. Officers were encouraged to view themselves not merely as enforcers of the law, but as partners in the ongoing effort to build trust and mutual respect between law enforcement and the communities they served. Over time, these changes began to bear fruit, and the department's reputation slowly improved as transparency and accountability became central tenets of its operation. General Harrison, too, embraced his role as a community leader with quiet determination. His personal journey, from a decorated military veteran to a symbol of dignity in the face of injustice, resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. He became a mentor to young veterans and community activists, sharing the lessons he had learned through decades of service and sacrifice. His public appearances, marked by calm yet powerful rhetoric, inspired many to stand up for what was right and to work tirelessly for a society free from prejudice. Harrison's story was not just about one man's struggle. It became a rallying cry for justice and a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. In the months and years that followed, the impact of that sweltering summer afternoon continued to reverberate throughout the town and beyond. The incident at the grocery store, once a painful memory, evolved into a powerful symbol of the need for systemic change. It was discussed in local classrooms, debated in town hall meetings, and cited in media reports as an example of how one moment of unchecked bias could spark a movement. Neighbors who had once exchanged only casual greetings now engaged in open, honest dialogue about their shared experiences and the steps necessary to build a more inclusive community. The town's journey toward healing was neither quick nor easy. Deep-seated prejudices do not vanish overnight, and there were moments when the wounds inflicted that day seemed too raw to mend. Yet, through persistent effort and unwavering commitment, the community slowly began to bridge the divides that had once separated them. Initiatives were launched to celebrate diversity and foster cultural exchange, and local organizations worked tirelessly to ensure that every voice was heard. In time, the memory of that fateful afternoon served not only as a reminder of past injustices, but also as a beacon of hope for a better future. As the community continued to evolve, the legacy of General Harrison's calm and dignified response to injustice remained a touchstone. His life, marked by decades of sacrifice and an unyielding commitment to honor, stood as proof that even in the face of deep-seated prejudice, strength of character and steadfast integrity could prevail. Harrison's influence extended far beyond the boundaries of his hometown, inspiring people across the nation to challenge discrimination and to advocate for a more just society. Thus, the story of that sweltering summer afternoon in a small southern town became woven into the fabric of its collective memory, a poignant reminder that while prejudice may persist, it can be overcome by courage, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to what is right. It was a story of conflict and accountability, of a hero who faced humiliation with grace, and of a community determined to rise above its past. And though the scars of that day would never completely fade, they served as a constant call to action, urging every citizen to work together for a future where justice, respect, and dignity are not merely ideals, but everyday realities. In the end, the lessons learned from that incident transformed not only the lives of those directly involved, but also the entire town. What began as an act of unchecked aggression evolved into a movement for reform, a journey toward healing, and a renewed commitment to the values that bind a community together. General Harrison's legacy, built on honor and resilience, continued to inspire and remind everyone that the power to enact change lies within each individual, and in that quiet, determined spirit, the town found its path forward. One marked by hope, unity, and a steadfast belief that together they could overcome even the deepest divisions. In the end, the painful events of that sweltering summer afternoon left an indelible mark on the entire town, a stark reminder that unchecked bias and discrimination harm not only individuals, but the very fabric of community life. General Harrison's dignified composure in the face of injustice became a beacon of hope amid a sea of prejudice, inspiring residents to stand together and demand accountability and change from those entrusted with their protection. As the days turned into weeks and then months, the incident sparked a profound transformation within the community. Town meetings, once quiet and infrequent, blossomed into spirited forums where neighbors shared personal stories of pain and resilience. These gatherings evolved into a collective movement for social justice, where citizens discussed not only the need for reform in law enforcement, but also the importance of fostering understanding and empathy across cultural divides. The shared experience of witnessing the altercation, and later the undeniable courage of General Harrison, ignited a desire for reconciliation that spread from the grocery store parking lot to every corner of the town. The lessons were clear and far-seeing. First, the incident underscored the reality that every act of prejudice has consequences that extend far beyond the moment of confrontation. It exposed the deep-seated biases that can fester in any society, no matter how small or seemingly harmonious, and showed that such biases, if left unchecked, can tear communities apart. Yet, it also demonstrated that when individuals are willing to confront these injustices openly and honestly, they can transform pain into progress. General Harrison's calm and measured response in the midst of aggression served as a powerful example of moral fortitude. His ability to rise above personal humiliation, to accept the situation with grace and dignity, and to use his own suffering as a catalyst for positive change, resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. His story reminded the community that true strength is not measured solely by physical might or authoritative power, but by the capacity to uphold one's principles even when faced with overwhelming adversity. As the town moved forward, the reverberations of that fateful day continued to influence its course. The police department, now under new leadership inspired by the calls for reform, implemented comprehensive training programs focused on cultural sensitivity, conflict de-escalation, and community engagement. These initiatives not only sought to mend the strained relationship between law enforcement and the public, but also aimed to create a more inclusive environment, where every citizen could feel safe and respected. Local schools began to incorporate lessons on diversity, tolerance, and the history of civil rights into their curricula, ensuring that future generations would learn from the past. Community centers organized workshops and cultural events designed to celebrate differences and build bridges between people of all backgrounds. Through these concerted efforts, the town slowly emerged from the shadow of that painful afternoon, its people united by a shared commitment to justice and equality. The moral of this story is both timeless and urgently relevant. When individuals choose to confront their own prejudices and work together with courage, empathy, and determination, even the most deep-seated divisions can be healed. The transformation of the town was not instantaneous. It was the result of persistent collective effort. A testament to the power of community when it refuses to accept injustice as an immutable reality. Ultimately, the legacy of that day is a powerful reminder that while the scars of discrimination may never fully vanish, they can serve as catalysts for growth and positive change. Every challenge presents an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to the values of respect, dignity, and fairness. General Harrison's story teaches us that each act of courage and every voice raised in defiance of prejudice contributes to the slow, steady march toward a more just society. In a world where the shadows of bias still linger, his example shines brightly, urging us all to stand up, speak out, and work together to ensure that justice, compassion, and understanding prevail over fear and hatred. His words carried an unmistakable threat, and the air between them grew thick with unease. Recognizing the potential for escalation, Harrison chose to remain as composed as he could. "My ID is in the car," he offered in a soft, conciliatory tone, hoping that a simple explanation might diffuse the tension. But Brown, whose aggressive stance was already firmly set, was not interested in any peaceful resolution. "Didn't you hear me?" Brown shouted, his voice echoing across the lot. "I said, show me your ID immediately." With that, and without any further warning, Brown lunged forward and grabbed Harrison's arm, twisting it harshly behind his back. In that instant, Brown's face flushed with a disturbing mix of anger and satisfaction as he exerted his power over the man before him. As the altercation unfolded, onlookers in the grocery store parking lot began to gather. People stopped what they were doing and turned their heads toward the commotion. Many were shocked to see a white officer physically detaining a black man who, to their eyes, exuded dignity and respect. Several bystanders quickly pulled out their phones, intent on recording every moment of what was clearly becoming a significant incident. Seconds later, a biker suit acted among the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. Someone remarked, "That's General Harrison," while another voice asked in disbelief, "What the hell is going on? Why is he being arrested?" Even as the crowd's anger and confusion grew, Brown remained resolute, his pride and growing ego preventing him from admitting even a hint of error. "You're under arrest for disobeying an officer," Brown declared in a harsh, final tone as he snapped the handcuffs tightly around Harrison's wrists. At this pronouncement, the crowd erupted in anger and disbelief. People began to shout, realizing that this was no ordinary routine stop. It was an overt manifestation of racial bias playing out in front of their very eyes. "Let him go!" an elderly woman cried out passionately. "That's our general. He served our country with honor." Yet Brown, intoxicated by the power he believed he wielded in that moment, paid no heed to the protests. In his mind, he was in complete control, and his actions were justified. Within minutes, the scene had taken on a larger significance. The growing crowd, now swelling with concerned onlookers, bore silent witness to an incident that quickly became a symbol of the racial tension that had long simmered beneath the surface in this small town. The tension in the air thickened with every passing second, and voices began to rise in protest, some demanding that the officer explain himself, others urging him to stop. But Brown, emboldened by his sense of authority, ignored every outcry. Just then, the sound of an approaching patrol car broke through the murmurs of the crowd. Sergeant Martin, a seasoned officer who had served in the town for many years, stepped out of the vehicle. His eyes immediately took in the scene. A crowd had gathered around his colleague, who was still in the midst of handcuffing General Harrison. Recognizing the general, a respected veteran and a cherished figure in the community, Martin felt a surge of anger. "What are you doing?" he called out as he pushed his way through the gathering crowd toward Brown and Harrison. "This is General Harrison. Release him immediately." For a long moment, Brown froze. His face flushed with a mix of anger and shame as he realized, perhaps too late, the gravity of what he had done. "General," he mumbled, his voice faltering. I didn't know who you were," he stammered, fumbling awkwardly with the handcuffs as the crowd's murmurs of disapproval grew louder with each passing second. Despite the humiliation and the physical discomfort of the situation, General Harrison remained remarkably composed. He understood, in that moment, the deep-seated issues at play. This was not merely an encounter with an overzealous officer, but a stark confrontation with systemic bias and the ignorance that often fueled it.